So, I want you to picture a world map.
Oh, the classic classroom map.
Yeah, exactly. You know the one. The standard political map with all the countries filled in with those different pastel colors. France is purple, Brazil is green.
China is yellow. Right.
Right. And we look at those thick black lines bordering the countries, and we tend to think of them as permanent ink. Like that is the world.
That's how it's always been.
Exactly, and how it will always be.
It's a comforting illusion, honestly, but if you zoom out just a little bit and look at a time lapse of history, those lines are incredibly fluid.
Yeah.
They're way more like shifting sands than permanent ink.
Which is wild to think about. I mean, countries fracture, they dissolve, they merge, or sometimes they just vanish completely. And that is exactly what we are digging into today for this deep dive.
It's a fascinating topic.
It really is. We're looking at a stack of research and sources that explain why. Why do some states survive for centuries, seemingly rock solid, while others just seem to spin out of control and break apart every few decades?
Right.
It almost feels like there is this invisible physics at play in geopolitics.
Invisible physics is actually a perfect analogy. That's exactly right. Because in political geography, the survival of a state isn't just random.
It's not just luck of the draw.
No, not at all. It is determined by this constant, really high-stakes tug of war between two very specific forces. And if you understand these forces, you can actually look at the news, whether it's a civil war in Sudan or, I don't know, a high-speed rail project in Europe.
And you can understand exactly what is happening to the structural integrity of that country.
Exactly.
So our mission today is to decode that physics. We're going to break down the sources and look at the forces that rip nations apart, things like inequality and ethnic tension.
And also the forces that glue them together.
Right, which, spoiler alert, are sometimes surprisingly boring things.
Boring, but absolutely essential.
Yeah. But before we get into the real-world examples, let's get the terminology down so we're all speaking the same language.
Good idea.
The research centers on two main concepts: centrifugal forces and centripetal forces. Now, I vaguely remember this from high school physics class.
The spinning bucket of water.
That's the one.
Yeah, so centrifugal force is the outward pull. When you spin that bucket, the water wants to fly out, away from the center.
Okay.
In a geopolitical context, based on the research, centrifugal forces are the stressors. They are the things pushing the population apart, disrupting the social order, and essentially threatening to fracture the state into pieces.
Okay, so centrifugal is the divider. It pulls apart.
Right. And the opposite would be centripetal forces. Think petal like a flower, but the root is actually Latin for seeking the center.
Seeking the center, okay.
Yeah, these are the forces that bind a population together, they strengthen the government's sovereignty, and they keep the country unified.
So effectively, every country on Earth is caught in this tug-of-war.
Every single one. It is not a static state at all. It's a constant, active balance.
And if the dividers win out over the uniters?
If the centrifugal forces get stronger than the centripetal forces, the state fails. It's that simple, and honestly, that dangerous.
Well, let's start with that worst-case scenario then. When the centrifugal forces win, what does that actually look like on the ground? Because the source material brings up this term, the failed state, which sounds pretty catastrophic.
It is catastrophic. A failed state isn't just a government that people are annoyed with.
Or a president with low poll numbers.
Right, exactly. A failed state is when the government becomes so weak that it effectively loses control over its own territory. The gravitational pull of the center is just gone.
So we're talking about a total collapse of authority.
Precisely. And the source material highlights 3 specific markers that tell us a state has failed. The first one is internal corruption.
And we should clarify, right?
Yeah, we aren't talking about a mayor taking a bribe for a zoning permit. We are talking a corruption that completely hollows out the state's institutions.
The notes actually mention North Korea in this context.
Yes. In a case like North Korea, the institutions of the state effectively stop functioning for the people entirely. They exist solely to ensure the survival of the regime.
Right.
The police, the courts, the bureaucracy. They aren't there to serve the public good. They're there to extract resources and maintain power. And when that happens, the public's trust just evaporates.
Which makes sense. I mean, if the system is rigged against you, you have no stake in maintaining the system. You're just trying to survive it.
Exactly. It's a huge loss of a binding force. Now, the second marker mentioned in the research is conflict.
Like civil wars.
Persistent, unresolved conflict. Usually religious or ethnic fighting that the central government is completely powerless to stop. The sources point to places like Yemen, Somalia, and historically Turkey as examples where this has been a major, major issue.
So if you have militias controlling huge chunks of territory,
And the Central Army can't dislodge them, yeah, you don't really have a state anymore. You have a collection of warring factions.
which leads directly to the third marker. And honestly, this one feels like the most tangible one for the average person living there.
The loss of basic services.
Yeah.
This is the daily reality of a failed state. It's basically a checklist of survival. Can the government provide physical security? Can you walk down the street without being attacked?
Is there a working judicial system if you are attacked?
Right, but it goes even deeper. Healthcare, clean drinking water, electricity.
The really basic stuff we take for granted in functioning states.
Exactly. And also the ability to protect fundamental rights, like voting. When the answer to, can the government provide this, is simply, no, the state has failed.
The social contract is broken.
Completely broken. People stop looking to the center for solutions and they start looking to local tribes or militias or just themselves. The state dissolves because it has no utility.
It's a terrifying prospect.
Yeah.
But those are the extreme cases, obviously. Most countries aren't failed states, but they still have these centrifugal forces pulling at them.
Oh, constant.
I want to pivot to uneven development because this seems like something even wealthy, very stable nations struggle with.
Absolutely. The sources show this is a massive driver of internal resentment. When wealth and infrastructure and opportunity are not spread evenly across a country, it creates a really dangerous us versus them dynamic right within the same borders.
And the sources give a really vivid visual for this. They talk about Mumbai in India.
Yes, Mumbai is often used as the textbook example of this friction because you have this stark visual contrast where luxury high-rise housing, literally some of the most expensive real estate in the world, sits immediately adjacent to sprawling shanty towns.
You can stand in one spot and see extreme wealth and extreme poverty side by side.
You can, and that visual difference fuels immense tension.
Because it's one thing to know people are rich somewhere out there, but it's another to see their swimming pools from your tin shack.
Exactly. It's a huge centrifugal tension. But the research also points out it's not just about rich and poor neighborhoods in one city. It's often about massive regional divides.
Right.
Look at the example of Italy.
The north-south divide in Italy, which I think tourists often miss entirely, but the economic reality of Milan is vastly different from Sicily.
Drastically different. The north of Italy is historically much more industrial, it's prosperous, it's connected to the rest of the European economy.
And the south.
The south, the Mezzogiorno, has been more agrarian and much less developed. And that economic gap creates real political tension. The people in the rich regions often resent their tax money going to the poorer regions.
While the people in the poor regions feel neglected or looked down upon.
Right. And as the source notes, the consequence of that isn't just people grumbling at the dinner table.
It gets real.
It leads to public demonstrations, social unrest, and in severe cases, actual violence. You see the rise of regionalist political parties that basically run on the platform of, why are we paying for them?
Wow.
That is a centrifugal force actively trying to snap the country into.
So money and basic safety are huge factors. But here's where the research gets really interesting to me. Sometimes the tension isn't about what the government does with money, but about who the people are. Let's talk about stateless nations.
This is a really crucial concept. To understand it, you have to separate the word state from the word nation.
Even though we use them interchangeably all the time in casual conversation.
Right, but in political geography, they mean very different things.
Break it down for us.
A state is a political entity. It's the borders, a government, a seat at the UN. It's the lines on the map.
Okay.
A nation is a group of people who share a common culture, language, ethnicity, and history. Usually, these things overlap. The French nation lives in the French state.
But not always.
Not always. A stateless nation describes a distinct group of people, an ethnic or cultural unit that doesn't have a country to call their own.
They're a nation of people without a state of territory.
Exactly. And the classic example cited in the literature here is the Kurds. You have a distinct people with their own language and culture, but they are spread across the borders of Syria, Iraq, Iran, and Turkey.
Which sounds like a recipe for incredible tension. You've got millions of people living in these countries who might feel more loyalty to their Kurdish identity than to the state they actually happen to live in.
That's exactly the dynamic. And the states that rule over them often view that desire for independence or autonomy as a direct threat to their sovereignty.
It becomes a massive centrifugal force.
A massive one. The sources point out that in Turkey, for instance, the conflict has been quite intense. The government there has labeled certain Kurdish political parties as terrorist organizations.
And they use that label to justify military action.
Right, according to the research. So you get this cycle. The stateless nation pushes for recognition, the state pushes back with force to maintain control, and the division just gets stronger.
It creates an internal engine of conflict that just keeps running.
Yeah, and this leads right into the broader idea of ethnic nationalist movements. This is when a minority group within a multinational state gets pushed too far by the majority.
Usually when the majority ethnic group tries to marginalize the minority, right?
Yes. If you try to force everyone to be exactly the same, you often end up breaking the country apart. The history of Sudan is a really tragic but clear example of this from the sources.
Walk us through that one, because that map actually did change fairly recently.
It did. So after Sudan gained independence from Britain, power was concentrated in the north. The government there was Muslim-led. But the problem was that the south of the country was predominantly Christian or followed traditional animist religions.
Right.
And the northern government attempted to Islamicize the southern minority.
So they tried to force their culture on the other half of the country.
Essentially, yes. They tried to create a unified identity by force. And that marginalization, combined with a rising sense of nationalism in the south, led to a brutal civil war.
The centrifugal forces were just too strong to contain.
Way too strong. It eventually led to the actual independence of South Sudan in 2011. The country literally split in two.
It really shows the power of these forces. It's not just theoretical, it literally changes the map.
The source also mentions the Basque separatists in Spain as another example of this, demanding autonomy. Spain has dealt with internal instability for decades because of that.
It's the same pattern. A distinct group feeling their identity is being suppressed by the central power.
Exactly.
Okay, well, I feel like we've painted a pretty bleak picture so far. We've got corruption, civil wars, inequality, countries breaking in half.
It's heavy stuff.
I feel like the natural state of things is just to fall apart. So let's pivot. If you're a state, how do you stop that? How do you manufacture unity?
Well, you need to activate the centripetal forces. And honestly, one of the strongest unifiers highlighted in the research is actually incredibly boring.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
It's not poetry or grand speeches. It's concrete.
You're talking about infrastructure.
I am. Roads, power grids, water pipes.
I mean, I have to push back on this a little bit. I like a smooth highway as much as the next person, but does a road really make me feel patriotic? Does it really keep a country from collapsing?
Think about the logic behind it. If a government builds reliable roads that connect remote villages to the big cities, suddenly those villagers have access to markets.
They can sell their crops.
They can travel, their economic life improves dramatically.
Okay, so there's a clear financial benefit.
Right. Now add electricity. If the state creates a power grid that keeps your lights on and your business running, and they provide clean water that keeps your kids healthy, what message does that send?
I guess it says, we see you and we're taking care of you.
Exactly. It binds the population to the state. It proves the government actually functions. When people have economic growth and a higher standard of living because of state investment, they become loyal.
Because they have something to lose if the state fails.
Exactly. Equitable infrastructure is a massive centripetal force. It creates a physical and economic web that holds the whole territory together.
That actually makes total sense when you frame it like that.
Right.
If the government provides the electricity that keeps my lights on, I am probably less likely to try and overthrow it.
Very true.
But there has to be an emotional component too, right?
Yeah,
Humans aren't just economic robots. We need to feel like we belong to a team.
we do. And that brings us to cultural cohesion. States actively try to create a shared identity. They use symbols and institutions to make you feel like you belong to that team.
Like what kind of institutions?
Education is a massive one, a standardized curriculum. If every child in the country learns the same history, sings the same songs, learns the same values, you are building a shared foundation for the next generation.
It's almost like you're installing the same operating system in everyone's brain.
In a way, yeah. You're creating a shared database of references.
Yeah.
And then you reinforce that with national icons.
Flags, anthems, holidays.
Right. It's funny how much we take those things for granted, but they are very deliberately designed to be unifiers. They are visual and auditory reminders of the collective.
And then, of course, you have the really high-energy unifiers. Sports.
Oh, absolutely. The World Cup. The Olympics. Think about what happens during the FIFA World Cup. It doesn't matter if you're from the north or the south, rich or poor. When the national team scores, Everyone cheers together.
It creates this moment where all those internal differences we talked about earlier, the economic gaps, the political arguments, they just sort of vanish for 90 minutes.
And that matters. That shared emotion is the glue. The source specifically highlights international sports as powerful events where collective success creates national pride. It acts as an emotional reset button for the country.
The sources actually give a great example of a country that does this unity thing really well, despite being kind of complicated on paper. Switzerland.
Switzerland is fascinating. It has multiple languages: German, French, Italian, Romanish. It has diverse cultural backgrounds. Geographically, it's chopped up by mountains.
By all accounts, the centrifugal forces there should be really strong.
Very strong.
Yet it's one of the most stable countries on Earth.
Because they have built incredible stability through shared institutions and a really strong commitment to federalism, they give local regions a lot of autonomy, but they've managed to create a Swiss identity that sits above the linguistic differences.
That is centripetal force in action.
Exactly. They didn't try to crush the diversity like we saw in Sudan. They built a structure that could hold it all together.
So we have infrastructure buying loyalty, and we have culture and sports building pride. But there's one more concept in the notes that seems a bit tricky to me. We talked about nationalism earlier as a bad thing, right? Like a divider. But the notes say it can also be a unifier.
Yes. This is the double-edged sword of ethno-nationalism. It depends entirely on the context.
So ethno-nationalism is basically pride in your specific ethnic group's identity.
Correct. Now, we saw how that breaks a country if a minorities group wants out. But if the entire country is facing an external threat, that same fourth ethno-nationalism can be the strongest glue imaginable.
Can you give us an example of it working as a unifier from the research?
Yeah, the source points to Belarus. Recently, faced with the threat of annexation or heavy-handed influence from Russia, there has been a huge surge in Belarusian national cohesion.
It's interesting.
The external threat made them hold tighter to their own distinct cultural identity. They unified in resistance to the outsider.
So having a common enemy or a common other strengthens the bond at home.
Exactly. Nothing unites a group faster than a threat from the outside. Japan is another example cited in the text, though in a slightly different way.
How so?
Japan has historically had very strong cultural cohesion in a highly homogeneous society. That shared ethno-nationalism provides a deep, deep level of state stability. There is just less internal friction because the cultural identity is so uniform.
It is really interesting how the exact same emotion, that feeling of I am proud of who we are, can either destroy a country or save it, entirely depending on where the lines are drawn.
It creates a synthesis. We can look at a map and say, okay, is this pride pointing inward to break us up, or is it pointing outward to hold us together?
And a smart leader knows how to direct that energy.
Absolutely.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? I think we should look at the summary table provided in the source, the scorecard, if you will.
Let's recap the scorecard. On the one side, we have centrifugal forces. Their goal, pull apart.
And the consequences are failed states, uneven development, stateless nations, and ethnic fracturing.
Right. And on the other side, centripetal forces, goal, pull together, consequences, sovereignty, cohesion, equitable infrastructure, and national pride.
And geographers are essentially using this balance sheet to predict the future. They look at a country and ask, which list is longer right now?
That's the core of the invisible physics.
And that is the real takeaway for you. When you scroll through the news tomorrow, try to look at the headlines through this exact lens. If you see a story about a region demanding a referendum for independence or a civil war breaking out, you are watching centrifugal forces winning.
And if you see a story about a massive new high-speed rail network connecting a country or a nation just going crazy over a gold medal, you are watching centripetal forces doing their work.
You really start to realize that stability isn't an accident. It is a constant tug of war.
It creates a totally different perspective on world events. You stop seeing them as random chaos and start seeing them as part of this structural equation.
And that actually leads me to a final thought I want to leave everyone with. We tend to think of countries as permanent things, like, oh, that's France, it'll always be France.
Right.
But looking at all these sources, you realize how incredibly fragile the balance really is. If a stable nation stops doing the work, if they stop maintaining the roads, or they stop teaching the shared history, or if they let inequality rot the system from the inside.
How long does it take for the centrifugal forces to take over?
Exactly. It's the ultimate question. Is stability permanent, or does it have to be earned every single day?
That is the question.
And that is the thought we will leave you to mull over. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the invisible physics of nations. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.